The message arrived on Headmaster's screen at exactly 3 hours past midnight. He read it once. Then he read it again. His forearms began to shake, and he had to set down the cup of warm tea he had been drinking. A human was coming to the academy. This was not unusual by itself. Humans had been part of the galactic community for nearly 100 years now. They served on ships, worked in research stations, and taught at universities across 1,000 worlds. They were strange creatures, soft and slow and terribly fragile, but they were not rare. What made arms shake was not the human, it was the assignment. Dr. Vance, a xenobiology specialist from Earth's Northern University, had been assigned as the emergency caretaker for the cubs. The previous caretaker, a heavily armored named, had collapsed from stress poisoning 2 days ago. His species was supposed to be immune to stress. The cubs had broken him anyway. Pushed himself away from his desk and walked to the window of his office. Outside, the lights of Station Velar 9 glittered against the black emptiness of space. The Galactic Integration Academy had operated here for over 2,000 years. It was the finest institution of its kind. Young beings from hundreds of species came here to learn, to grow, and to become productive members of galactic society. But some species were harder to integrate than others. There were apex predators from a world called Prime. It was what humans would call a death world. Everything there wanted to kill everything else. They had evolved at the very top of that deadly food chain. They had 8 powerful limbs. They had mandibles that could cut through metal. They had venom sacs that produced poison strong enough to kill most species in seconds. And they were utterly impossible to socialize before they reached maturity. Adults were actually quite reasonable. They had built cities, developed technology, and joined the galactic community willingly. But their cubs operated on pure instinct. They responded only to dominance displays and fear. They attacked anything that seemed weak. They had already sent 3 caretakers to the medical bay this cycle alone. One of them was still there. Turned back to his desk and pulled up the file on Dr. Vance. Her picture showed a small woman with brown hair and warm eyes. She was smiling. She looked like the kind of person who smiled often. She also looked like she would last approximately 5 minutes in the enclosure with 7 cubs. The headmaster began making calls. By morning, he had assembled an emergency response team of 12 heavily armed security officers. He had placed the medical staff on high alert. He had contacted them to begin the paperwork for what would likely be a formal incident report. He had also quietly cleared the entire residential wing near the enclosure, moving 63 students to temporary housing. He documented everything. He was very careful about the documentation. This would either become a case study for future training programs or evidence for an investigation. He was not sure which one yet. The human's transport arrived at midday. Went to the docking bay himself to meet her. He wanted to see this woman with his own eyes. He wanted to understand what the Earth government had been thinking when they approved this assignment. Dr. Vance walked off the transport with a single bag over her shoulder. She was even smaller in person than she had looked in the picture. Her hair was pulled back from her face, and she wore simple clothes that offered no protection whatsoever. No armor, no shields, not even thick fabric. She saw and walked straight toward him with that same smile from her file. "Headmaster," she said, extending her hand in the human greeting gesture. "Thank you for having me. I came as quickly as I could when I heard about the situation." Shook her hand carefully. Human bones were fragile. He had learned this during his first year working with them. "Dr. Vance," he said, "I must be honest with you. I have serious concerns about this assignment." "I understand," she said. Her voice was calm and friendly. "The cubs have a reputation." "They have sent 3 caretakers to the medical bay," said. "One of them may never walk again. These are not domesticated animals, Dr. Vance. They are apex predators in their juvenile stage. They operate on instinct. They will see you as prey." The human nodded. She did not seem frightened, found this confusing. "I have read all the reports," she said. "I know what I am walking into, but I have also worked with dangerous species before. I spent 2 years on 7 with the rock serpents. Before that, I helped establish the first communication protocols with the mindless ones on Europa Station." Knew about both of these achievements. They were part of why she had been selected, but rock serpents and the mindless ones were dangerous in predictable ways. The cubs were dangerous in every way. "Dr. Vance," he said slowly, "I must ask you directly, Do you understand that you may die in that enclosure?" She looked at him for a long moment. Her smile faded slightly, but her eyes remained steady. "Yes," she said. "I understand, but those cubs have been without proper care for 2 days now. They are frightened and confused and alone. Someone needs to help them." Did not know what to say to this. In his experience, most beings looked at the cubs and saw monsters. This human looked at them and saw children who needed help. He decided that she was either very brave or very foolish, perhaps both. "Very well," he said finally. "I will take you to the enclosure, but I must insist on certain safety measures. The emergency response team will be stationed outside at all times. You will wear a communication device so you can call for help, and you will follow extraction protocols if the situation becomes dangerous." "Of course," Dr. Vance said. She picked up her bag and smiled again. "Now, where can I find the little ones?" Led her through the station toward the containment wing. As they walked, he noticed that she did not hurry. She did not look nervous. She moved with the easy confidence of someone going to meet old friends. The security team was already in position when they arrived. 12 officers in full combat armor stood in a half circle around the enclosure door. Their weapons were charged and ready. Dr. Vance looked at them, then looked at. "Is all this really necessary?" she asked. "Yes," said firmly, "it is." She shrugged and walked toward the door. Then she paused and turned back. "Headmaster," she said, "I have one request." "What is it?" "Please do not intervene unless I ask for help. The cubs will sense the fear from the security team. It will make everything harder." Wanted to argue. Every protocol he knew told him to argue, but something in her voice made him stop. "Very well," he said. "We will wait for your signal." Dr. Vance nodded, took a deep breath, and walked through the door into the enclosure. The door sealed behind her, and the academy held its breath. The enclosure was dark when stepped inside. The lights had been dimmed to match the natural conditions of Prime, where the thick atmosphere blocked most sunlight. She stood still for a moment, letting her eyes adjust to the shadows. She could hear them moving. The sound was soft at first, a scraping of claws against metal floor, a clicking of mandibles somewhere to her left. Then more sounds joined in from different directions. They were surrounding her. She knew this without seeing them. She could feel their attention like heat on her skin. The first cub appeared from behind a large rock formation in the center of the room. It was bigger than she had expected. The files had said they were the size of large dogs, but this one was closer to a small horse. Its 8 limbs moved with terrible grace, and its eyes caught what little light there was and reflected it back like black mirrors. More cubs emerged from the shadows, 2 from the right, 3 from the left. Another one dropping down from a climbing structure near the ceiling. 7 in total, just as the reports had said. They formed a circle around her. In the monitoring room, Headmaster gripped the edge of his console with all 4 hands. The security team leader was speaking rapidly into his communicator, coordinating the breach team. Medical staff were wheeling emergency equipment into position outside the enclosure door. On the screen, the 7 cubs had arranged themselves in what the behavioral files called a pre-strike hunting formation. Their venom sacs were poolsing visibly under their carapaces. Their mandibles were open and dripping. "She is going to die," whispered one of the junior staff members. Could not disagree. Inside the enclosure, looked at the cubs around her. They were magnificent creatures, she thought. Terrifying, yes, but magnificent. Evolution had spent millions of years crafting them into perfect predators, and it showed in every line of their bodies. She also noticed other things. The smallest cub had a scratch on its front limb that looked infected. The largest one had a scar across its 7th leg, old and healed but still visible. Several of them were thinner than they should be. They had not been eating well. They were not monsters. They were children. Scared, confused, hungry children who had been abandoned by their caretaker and locked in a dark room for 2 days. Made her decision. She sat down. Not quickly, not with any sudden movement that might trigger their hunting instincts. She simply bent her knees, lowered herself to the floor, and settled into a cross-legged position right there in the middle of the circle. The cubs froze. In the monitoring room, everyone froze too. "What is she doing?" demanded the security team leader. Did not answer. He was watching the screens with all his attention, trying to understand what he was seeing. reached into her bag slowly, giving the cubs time to see each movement. She pulled out an old book with a worn cover and bent pages. Then she opened it to the first chapter and began to read aloud. Her voice was calm and steady. The words were simple ones from an old Earth story about a girl who fell down a hole and found a strange world. She read the way one might read to a young child before bedtime. Soft, rhythmic, unhurried. The cubs did not know what to do. Their instincts were screaming at them. This creature was small and soft and had no weapons. It should be prey, it should run, it should fight, it should do something that made sense. But it just sat there, making sounds, not threatening sounds, not frightened sounds, just sounds. The largest cub, the one with the scar, took a step closer. Its mandibles were still open, but the clicking had stopped. It tilted its head to one side, watching the human with something that might have been curiosity. Did not look up from her book, she kept reading. Another cub moved closer, then another. The circle was getting smaller, but it was no longer a hunting formation. It was something else, something the files had never documented. In the monitoring room, the behavioral specialist on duty was staring at her instruments with wide eyes. "Their stress hormones are dropping," she said. "That should not be possible. They are apex predators in a contained space with unfamiliar prey. Their stress levels should be increasing." "What does this mean?" asked. "I do not know," she admitted. "I have never seen readings like this." On the screen, the largest cub had reached the edge of sitting space. It lowered itself to the ground, folding its 8 limbs beneath its body in a resting position. Its venom sacs stopped pulsing. Still did not look up, she just kept reading. One by one, the other cubs followed the largest one's example. They settled onto the floor around her in a semicircle, their bodies relaxed, their mandibles closed. The smallest cub, the one with the infected scratch, crept close enough to almost touch her knee. For a long time, there was no sound in the enclosure except voice and the soft breathing of 7 cubs. In the monitoring room, nobody moved. Nobody spoke, they all just watched. The security team leader finally broke the silence. "What just happened?" he asked. Shook his head slowly. "I think," he said carefully, "we just learned something new about humans." Finished the first chapter of her book. She closed it gently and looked up at the cubs for the first time since she had sat down. They were watching her with their dark mirror eyes, but there was no hunger in their gaze now. No threat. "Hello, little ones," she said softly. "My name is, I'm going to take care of you for a while. Is that all right?" The largest cub made a sound. It was not a hiss or a growl or any of the aggressive vocalizations listed in the behavioral files. It was something softer, something almost like a question. Smiled at it. "I know," she said. "You have had a hard time, but things are going to be better now, I promise." She reached out slowly, giving the cub every chance to pull away. It did not move. Her hand touched the hard surface of its carapace, just above the old scar on its 7th limb. The cub leaned into her touch. In the monitoring room, the junior staff member who had said she was going to die sat down heavily in the nearest chair. "Someone explain this to me," she said, "please." Nobody could. Headmaster watched the human sitting on the floor of the enclosure, surrounded by 7 of the most dangerous juvenile predators in the known galaxy. She was scratching the largest one behind what might have been its ears. He had been running the academy for 40 years. He had seen things that most beings could not imagine, but he had never seen anything like this. He reached for his communicator. "Stand down the breach team," he said quietly. "But keep them on alert. We are going to be watching this very closely." On the screen, Dr. Vance opened her book again and began to read the 2nd chapter. The cubs settled in to listen. And for the first time in months, there was peace in the enclosure. Days passed, and the academy did not know what to do with itself. The emergency response team was never dismissed. Headmaster refused to lower security, no matter how many quiet days went by. The 12 armed officers remained in position outside the enclosure at all times, rotating in shifts, watching and waiting for something to go wrong. But nothing went wrong. Dr. Vance had established a routine, and the cubs had accepted it completely. She woke at the same time each morning, when the enclosure's artificial lighting shifted from night mode to dawn mode. She stretched her body the way humans did, reaching her arms above her head and bending from side to side. Then she greeted each cub by name. She had given them all names in the first 3 days. The largest one with the scar on his seventh limb she called Seven. The smallest one with the infected scratch that she had treated with medicine from her bag she called Pip. The others were named Shadow, Whisper, Thunder, Moss, and Bright. The academy staff had been confused by this at first. They did not use names. They identified each other through scent patterns and chemical signals. Names were meaningless to them. But the cubs learned their names anyway. When said Seven, the largest cub would look up. When she said Pip, the smallest one would come running. Somehow, without any evolutionary reason to understand human nomming customs, they had learned. Watch the morning feeding on the monitors, had changed the feeding schedule from twice daily to 4 smaller meals spread throughout the day. The behavioral specialist had questioned this at first, but the results spoke for themselves. The cubs were calmer, they ate more, they fought over food less. Ate her own meals in the enclosure with them. She sat in her usual spot in the center of the room with a tray of human food and ate slowly while the cubs ate their portion of raw meat nearby. Sometimes she would share small pieces of safe foods with them. Fruit, cooked vegetables, things that would not hurt their digestion. The cubs had started waiting for these treats. They would finish their own meals quickly, then arrange themselves around in their semicircle, watching her eat with patient eyes. When she offered a piece of fruit, they took it gently from her fingers. Cubs were not supposed to be gentle. Their mandibles were designed for tearing through armor plating and thick hide. But when they took food from his hand, they were careful, so careful. The mimicry began in the second week. It started with Seven, had a habit of sitting in a particular way when she read to them. She would tuck her legs beneath her, settle her weight to one side, and rest one hand on the floor for balance. It was a comfortable position for humans. It should have meant nothing to her. But Seven started sitting the same way. He would fold his 8 limbs in a pattern that looked nothing like the natural resting position of his species. He would lean to one side, the same side leaned too. He would rest one limb on the floor in the exact spot where she rested her hand. The behavioral specialist documented this with shaking hands. She had written 3 academic papers on behavior. She was considered the leading expert in her field, and she had never seen anything like this. Then Pip started doing it too, then Shadow. Within days, 4 of the 7 cubs had changed their resting posture to match the humans. But it did not stop there. Stretched every morning, she would reach her arms up, bend from side to side, touch her toes, and roll her shoulders. It was a simple human exercise routine meant to wake up her muscles and prepare for the day. The cubs began stretching with her. It looked strange. Their bodies were not designed for these movements. They had 8 limbs instead of 4. They had hard carapaces instead of soft skin, but they tried anyway. They reached their front limbs upward. They bent their bodies from side to side. They attempted to touch their mandibles to the ground, which was the closest they could come to touching their toes. The monitoring room fell completely silent when this was first observed. "They are learning from her," said the junior staff member who had been watching since the first day. "They are learning how to be calm." Nodded slowly. He was beginning to understand what he was seeing, even if he could not explain it. Vance had not tried to dominate the cubs. She had not shown them fear. She had not used any of the techniques that the Academy's protocols recommended. Instead, she had simply existed in their space. She had established her routines, her habits, her way of being, and then she had let the cubs watch. She had given them a model for behavior that did not involve hunting or fighting or dominance. She had shown them that it was possible to move through the world calmly, peacefully, without threat or fear, and they had chosen to follow her example. The strangest change came with the laughter. Laughed often. She laughed when Pip did something clumsy. She laughed when Seven made grumpy sounds at being woken up in the morning. She laughed when she read funny parts in her books. It was a natural, easy sound that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her. The cubs had no equivalent to laughter. Their species did not make sounds for joy, but they tried anyway. It started as a clicking noise made by snapping their mandibles together in rapid succession. It sounded nothing like human laughter, but they made this sound at the same moments when laughed. When she found something funny, they clicked along with her. The audio specialists analyzed the recordings and confirmed that this was unprecedented. No adult or juvenile had ever been documented making sounds in response to another species' emotional expressions. The cubs were not just mimicking postures and movements. They were trying to mimic her feelings. At the end of the second week, the behavioral specialist who had written 3 papers on aggression submitted her resignation. "I cannot continue," she told. "Everything I thought I knew about this species is wrong. I need to start over from the beginning." Accepted her resignation with understanding. He was beginning to think that many things he believed about the universe might need to be reconsidered. He had spent 40 years running the academy on a simple principle. Dangerous species required control. Dominance hierarchies were the only language that predators understood. Fear was a necessary tool for maintaining safety. But this small human woman had walked into an enclosure with 7 deadly predators and offered them something else entirely. She had offered them patience, routine, kindness, names. She had offered them a family, and against everything thought he knew about the universe, they had accepted. On the monitors, sat in her usual spot, reading from her worn paperback book. The 7 cubs were arranged around her in their semicircle, perfectly still, their dark mirror eyes fixed on the pages as if they could understand every word. When she turned the page, they all leaned forward slightly. When she paused to take a breath, they paused with her. When she smiled at a passage she liked, their mandibles relaxed into what the staff had started calling their happy expression. They were not predators in this moment. They were not dangerous. They were just children listening to a story, safe in the presence of someone who cared for them. Turned off his monitor and went to make some calls. There were people who needed to know about this. The alarms began screaming at exactly 14 minutes past 3 in the afternoon. Had been reading to the cubs when the first siren cut through the quiet of the enclosure. It was loud, the kind of sound designed to reach every corner of the station. Red emergency lights began flashing on the walls, turning the dim space into a nightmare of shadows and crimson pulses. The station's automated voice followed immediately, echoing from speakers she had not even noticed until now. "Warning, power fluctuation detected in Section 7. Containment protocols engaged. All personnel evacuate to designated safety zones. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill." Closed her book slowly. Her heart was beating fast, but she did not let it show on her face. She had read enough about to know that they could sense fear. They could smell the chemicals that frightened bodies released. If she panicked now, they would know. The cubs had already reacted. 7 was on his feet, all 8 limbs spread wide in a defensive stance. His mandibles were open and dripping venom. The scar on his 7th limb seemed to glow in the red emergency light. Every line of his body said he was ready to kill. Pip had retreated to the corner of the enclosure, curled into a ball with his limbs wrapped around himself. He was making a high-pitched keening sound that hurt to hear. Shadow and Whisper had positioned themselves on either side of the room, their hunting instincts taking over, looking for threats that needed to be destroyed. Thunder was hissing. Moss was climbing the walls. Bright had overturned the feeding station and was crouched behind it like a soldier behind a shield. They were seconds away from losing themselves entirely. In the monitoring room, Headmaster was shouting orders. The power fluctuation had triggered automatic lockdown procedures throughout the station. Blast doors were sealing. Systems were rerouting. And the containment enclosure for the cubs was now completely cut off from the rest of the academy. "Get me a connection to that room," demanded. "We need to extract her now." "The blast doors are sealed," the security team leader reported. "We cannot breach until the power stabilizes. Estimated time 3 minutes. "She does not have 3 minutes." Stared at the monitors. The cubs were in full defensive mode, their bodies ready for violence, their minds lost to instinct. This was exactly the scenario that had caused catastrophic incidents 6 times before. When cubs felt trapped and threatened, they attacked everything in sight. They could not help it. It was how they were built. Dr. Vance was going to die. Inside the enclosure, watched her cubs falling apart. She saw 7's venom dripping onto the floor, leaving small smoking marks where it touched the metal. She saw Pip trembling in the corner, terrified and alone. She heard Thunder's hiss building to a roar. The alarms kept screaming, the lights kept flashing. And made a choice. She stood up. She did not run toward the door. She did not try to find cover. She did not curl into a ball or show any sign of fear. Instead, she walked calmly to the center of the room, stepping over the overturned feeding station, moving past Shadow without flinching when his mandibles snapped near her shoulder. She reached her usual spot, the place where she sat every day to read, the place where the cubs gathered around her in their semicircle. She sat down. The movement was so unexpected that even the alarm seemed to pause for a moment. The cubs froze, their hunting instincts confused by this prey that was not behaving like prey. Opened her book. "Seven," she said, her voice cutting through the sirens with impossible calm. "Come sit with me." Seven did not move. His body was shaking with the need to attack something, anything, to make the fear and the noise and the flashing lights stop. "Seven," said again. She patted the floor beside her the same way she did every morning when she invited him to join her for reading time. "It is just noise. Come sit with me." One heartbeat passed. Then another. Then Seven took a step forward. His mandibles were still open. His venom was still dripping, but he took a step. In the monitoring room, everyone held their breath. Seven took another step, then another. He crossed the space between them like he was walking through deep water, fighting against the current of his own instincts. And then he reached side and lowered himself to the floor. His mandibles closed. "Good boy," said softly. She reached out and touched the scar on his seventh limb. "Good boy, see, it is just noise." Pip uncurled from his ball in the corner. He was still making that keening sound, but it was softer now. He looked at Seven, sitting calmly beside the human, and something in his terrified mind began to change. He started walking toward them. "Come on," Pip said. "Come sit with your brother." Pip reached them and collapsed against her other side, pressing his small body against her warmth. The keening sound stopped. Shadow lowered himself from his defensive position. Whisper followed. Thunder stopped hissing and moved toward the center of the room. Moss climbed down from the walls. Bright crept out from behind the overturned feeding station. One by one, they came to her. One by one, they settled into their semicircle around this small human woman who sat in the middle of chaos and offered them peace. The alarms were still screaming. The lights were still flashing. The automated voice was still announcing the emergency. But inside the circle of 7 cubs and 1 human, there was silence. Began to read. Her voice was steady. Her hands did not shake as she turned the pages. She read about the girl in the strange world, the one who fell down the hole and found impossible things. She read as if nothing was wrong, as if this was just another afternoon, as if they were all perfectly safe. The cubs listened. Their bodies relaxed. Their venom sacs stopped pulsing. Their breathing slowed to match the rhythm of her voice. When the power stabilized 3 minutes later and the alarms finally fell silent, the security team found them exactly like that. 7 cubs arranged in a perfect semicircle around a human woman, all of them calm, all of them still, all of them listening to a story about a world where impossible things happened every day. The security footage was and classified within the hour. 14 different departments requested access before the day was over, all of them. He was not ready to share what he had witnessed. He was not sure anyone would believe it. Later that evening, after the power was fully restored and the station returned to normal operations, went to the enclosure in person. He stood outside the transparent wall and watched Dr. Vance preparing the cubs for bed. She tucked each one into their sleeping spot with a gentle touch. She told each one good night by name. She promised she would see them in the morning. The cubs settled down without protest. Even 7, the largest and most aggressive, curled up peacefully and closed his eyes at her word. Waited until she left the enclosure before speaking. "Dr. Vance," he said, "what you did today should not have been possible." She looked at him with tired eyes. The calm she had shown during the emergency had cost her something. He could see it now in the slight trembling of her hands. "They were scared," she said simply. "Children do strange things when they are scared. They needed someone to show them it was going to be okay." "You could have died." "Yes," she agreed. "But running would not have saved me. Fear would not have saved me. The only thing that could save any of us was calm, so that is what I gave them." Studied her for a long moment. "What you have done here," he said carefully, "has never been accomplished before. These cubs were marked for failure. They were going to be sent back to Prime as you have changed everything." Smiled, but it was a tired smile. I did not change anything, she said. I just sat with them, I read them stories, I showed them that not everything in the universe wants to hurt them. She paused. They did the rest themselves. She turned and walked toward her quarters, leaving alone outside the enclosure. Inside, 7 cubs slept peacefully. And in the morning they would wake up, stretch alongside their human, and wait for her to read them another story. The report took Headmaster 3 weeks to write. He rewrote it 17 times, trying to find the right words. How do you explain something that should not exist? How do you describe a miracle to beings who have never believed in miracles? The Galactic Integration Academy had operated for over 2,000 standard years. In that time, it had developed protocols for every known species. It had established procedures for every possible situation. It had built its entire philosophy on a single foundational principle. Dangerous species required control through superior force. This was not cruelty, it was simple truth. The universe was full of predators, and predators understood only one language: dominance, power, the ability to destroy. If you could not establish yourself as the superior being, you would be treated as prey. Every species that joined the galactic community learned this lesson. Every integration program was built around this truth. Every caretaker for dangerous juveniles was selected for their ability to intimidate, suppress, or physically overpower their charges. Humans had been in the galactic community for less than 100 years. They were one of the youngest species to achieve interstellar travel. They were also one of the weakest. They had no natural weapons. No claws, no fangs, no venom. Their skin was soft and easily damaged. Their bones were fragile. They could not see in the dark, could not breathe underwater, could not survive extreme temperatures. By every measurement the Academy used, humans should have been prey animals. They should have been at the bottom of every food chain. But they were not. Had watched a human woman walk into an enclosure with 7 apex predators and turn them into children. She had not dominated them. She had not intimidated them. She had not shown them superior force of any kind. She had sat down and read them stories, and they had chosen to follow her. The report went to the Galactic Council with an unusual recommendation. Proposed the immediate integration of human techniques into all dangerous species rehabilitation programs. He proposed new training for caretakers that focused on patience instead of power. He proposed a complete revision of the Academy's foundational philosophy. The response was mixed. Some council members dismissed the report entirely. They called it an anomaly, a single case that proved nothing. They pointed to thousands of years of evidence that dominance was the only effective approach for dangerous species. Others were more curious. They requested the security footage. They reviewed the behavioral data. They watched a human woman sit calmly in the middle of 7 cubs during a station-wide emergency and bring them back from the edge of violence with nothing but her voice. They started asking questions. Meanwhile, at the Academy, life continued. Had been given a permanent position. Her official title was Senior Integration Specialist for High-Risk Juveniles. Her unofficial title, among the staff who had watched her work, was simply the Miracle Worker. She did not like either title. "I am just doing my job," she told when he tried to praise her. "The cubs do all the hard work, I just show up every day." But showing up, was beginning to understand, was exactly what made humans different. Most species approached dangerous beings with caution. They kept their distance. They established barriers. They protected themselves first and only engaged when absolutely necessary. Humans did not do this. They showed up. They stayed. They came back day after day, year after year, offering their presence without conditions. They did not wait for trust to be earned before giving it. They gave trust first and let others rise to meet it. It was foolish by galactic standards. It was dangerous. It should not have worked. But it did. The cubs continued to grow under care. Their bodies became stronger. Their minds became sharper, and their behavior continued to change in ways that the Academy's experts could not explain. They started playing. Cubs did not play. Their species had no evolutionary reason for play. They were born as hunters, and every moment of their development was focused on becoming better hunters. Play was a waste of energy. Play served no purpose. But taught them a game called hide and seek. Watched from his office window as the cubs scattered across the Academy gardens, hiding behind trees and under benches and inside decorative fountains. stood in the center of the open space, her eyes closed, counting slowly to 50. "Ready or not," she called out, "here I come." The cubs made their clicking sounds, the sound that meant happiness, the sound they had invented because they wanted to laugh like their human did. Found Pip first, hiding badly behind a bush that was much too small. She found Shadow next, clinging to the underside of a garden bridge. One by one, she discovered them all, and each discovery was met with happy clicks and excited scrambling. When she found Seven last, hiding in the branches of a tall tree, he dropped down beside her and pressed his large body against her side like a cat seeking affection. "Good hiding spot," she told him, scratching the place behind his eyes that he liked. "You are getting better at this." Seven made a rumbling sound deep in his chest, a sound of contentment, a sound that did not make. But these cubs made it now. Reports began coming in from other facilities. Other programs had heard about the cubs. Other organizations had started experimenting with human methods. The results were not always successful, but they were promising enough to keep people trying. A researcher on the far side of the galaxy reported that aggressive juvenile predators responded positively to consistent routines and gentle nomming practices. A behavioral institute found that dangerous species showed reduced stress hormones when housed with caretakers who demonstrated calm instead of dominance. A mindless one's rehabilitation colony discovered that their charges developed faster social skills when treated as individuals instead of threats. The universe was learning a new lesson. Humans did not conquer dangerous things. They did not suppress them or overpower them or force them into submission. Instead, they did something much more revolutionary. They treated dangerous things as if they were already family. They gave them names, they read them stories. They sat with them during storms and told them everything would be okay. They showed up every day without fail, offering their presence as a gift. And somehow, impossibly, the dangerous things believed them. On a warm afternoon in the Academy Gardens, Headmaster watched Dr. Vance sitting on a bench, reading from her worn paperback book. The 7 cubs were arranged around her in their familiar semicircle. They had been deemed impossible to socialize. They had been marked for failure. They had been considered too dangerous for any form of normal integration. Now they sat quietly in a garden, listening to a story about a girl in a strange world, waiting patiently for their human to turn the page. Seven sat closest too, his large body curved protectively around her smaller form. Pip had climbed onto the bench beside her, his head resting against her shoulder. Shadow and Whisper had positioned themselves like guardians at either end of the group. Thunder dozed peacefully in a patch of sunlight. Moss and Bright were practicing the stretching exercises that did every morning. When turned the page, 7 sets of mandibles clicked in unison. They were still mimicking her every move. Thought about the report he had sent to the council. He thought about the arguments and debates that were still ongoing. He thought about the 2,000 years of tradition that he was trying to change. It would not be easy. Many beings would resist. Many would insist that the old ways were better, that dominance was the only answer, that humans were simply lucky, and their methods would not work for everyone. But standing here, watching 7 deadly predators sit peacefully around a woman who had offered them nothing but kindness, knew that the universe had already changed. Humans had brought something new to the galactic community, something that could not be measured or explained by evolutionary biology, something that should not have worked but did anyway. They called it love. And slowly, one story at a time, one gentle touch at a time, one peaceful morning at a time, it was spreading across the stars. Closed her book and looked up at the artificial sun. The cubs looked up with her, tilting their heads at the same angle, mimicking her curiosity about the light. "Beautiful day," she said to them. "What do you think? Should we take a walk?" 7 stood up immediately, then Pip, then all the others, rising in sequence, ready to follow wherever she led. Watch them go, the small human woman walking through the gardens with 7 massive predators trailing behind her like devoted puppies. The academy had prepared for chaos, but the cubs sat calmly beside the human, mimicking her every move. And the universe would never be the same.